The phone call that changed everything reached me just as I finished presenting a major project to one of the largest technology companies in Colorado. Instead of celebrating another successful contract, I stared at my screen in complete disbelief because someone had just sent me a smiling photo from inside a house that no longer belonged to me, proudly claiming they had finally taken what should have been theirs all along. My hands became cold as I read the message again, realizing that the biggest threat to my peaceful life had never been a stranger but the people who shared my last name. My name is Ethan Brooks, and I was 31 years old when my family finally crossed a line that could never be erased. I worked as a cybersecurity consultant whose job was to identify weaknesses before criminals could exploit them, so I spent my days studying human behavior, digital systems, and the expensive consequences of careless decisions. Yet, somehow I had ignored the greatest danger sitting quietly inside my own family for years. My younger brother, Mason, had developed a habit of believing that every problem in his life should become someone else's responsibility, while my parents defended every selfish decision he made until he no longer recognized the difference between kindness and entitlement. Several months before everything exploded, I quietly sold my beautiful townhouse in Charlotte after accepting a promotion that required me to relocate to another state. The sale happened quickly because the retired Army investigator Daniel Carter appreciated the property exactly as it was, and after every legal document was signed, I packed my belongings, handed over every key, updated every security record, and walked away without telling my relatives because I wanted one peaceful chapter of my life before they discovered another opportunity to ask for money, favors, or a place to live. 3 weeks into a month-long business assignment in Vancouver, my phone vibrated with a message from Mason that included several cheerful photographs of moving boxes stacked inside the familiar living room where I no longer lived. His caption made my stomach tighten because it proudly declared that he had rescued the house from my selfish lifestyle and had moved his family inside while I was gone, insisting that successful people should share everything they owned with relatives instead of wasting space on themselves. Instead of feeling shocked, I felt strangely calm because I already knew something my entire family had completely overlooked. I briefly called my parents hoping common sense might still exist somewhere beneath years of favoritism, but the conversation ended exactly as I should have expected after a lifetime of excuses and blame. My mother insisted that Mason deserved stability more than I deserved privacy. My father accused me of acting arrogant simply because I had built a successful career, and both of them demanded that I stop being childish and hand over every remaining access code, completely unaware that the person who truly owned that house was about to come home and discover several unexpected strangers comfortably settling into his property. The next morning I opened the home security application that I had forgotten to remove from my phone after the sale, and one final camera was still connected because the new owner had not yet transferred every device into his own account. The video showed Mason walking through every room with complete confidence while his wife, Olivia, directed the children to choose bedrooms, hang family photos on the walls, and joke about how I would eventually calm down because I had always forgiven them before. I watched as they opened cabinets, rearranged expensive furniture, and complained that the previous owner had terrible taste even though nearly everything they criticized had already been purchased by Daniel after the closing. Mason even laughed while telling his wife that he planned to replace the front door lock before I returned because he wanted to make sure I could not surprise them, never realizing that I no longer had any legal connection to the property and that every careless decision was creating evidence against him instead of protecting him. Although I could have warned my brother with a single phone call, I quietly placed my phone on the hotel desk and allowed events to unfold without interference because I had spent my entire adult life rescuing him from disasters created by his own choices. Every unpaid debt, every broken promise, every damaged relationship, and every reckless mistake had been erased by my parents, who always insisted that family should stand together while expecting only me to make sacrifices. And I finally accepted that some lessons become meaningful only after reality delivers them. Late that afternoon, the front door suddenly opened, and the camera captured Daniel Carter returning from a week of official training several hours earlier than expected. His expression changed instantly when he noticed unfamiliar shoes near the entrance, children's backpacks scattered across the hallway, and voices echoing from the upstairs bedrooms. causing him to stop moving for just a moment before calmly reaching for his phone and requesting immediate assistance from local law enforcement. Mason walked downstairs carrying a television remote with the confidence of someone who believed he owned everything in sight, but his smile disappeared the second he came face to face with the true homeowner standing in the doorway. Before anyone could invent another excuse or dramatic story, Daniel firmly ordered everyone to remain exactly where they were until the police arrived. And for the first time in many years, I saw genuine fear replace the arrogance that had followed my brother through almost every chapter of his life. The first police officers arrived within minutes, filling the quiet neighborhood with flashing lights that drew curious neighbors onto their front porches to watch the unexpected commotion. Daniel calmly introduced himself, presented his identification, and handed the officers a folder containing the purchase agreement, property deed, and every document proving he had legally owned the townhouse for several weeks before my brother ever stepped inside. Mason immediately launched into an emotional performance that would have impressed anyone who did not know his history, insisting that the house had been promised to him by his successful older brother and that the misunderstanding was nothing more than a family disagreement. His wife eagerly supported every word, while my parents rushed through the front door pretending to rescue innocent victims, confidently telling the officers that I had invited Mason to move in before suddenly changing my mind out of jealousy and greed. One of the officers patiently listened to every conflicting story before requesting evidence instead of opinions, and that simple decision changed the atmosphere inside the house almost instantly. Daniel produced official closing documents, utility transfer records, security system registration, and digital ownership certificates, while my parents could offer nothing except emotional speeches and accusations about how successful children should always sacrifice everything for struggling relatives. Then my phone rang again, and this time it was my mother demanding that I fix the situation before my brother was embarrassed in front of the entire neighborhood. She blamed me for creating unnecessary drama by selling the house without informing the family, insisting that none of this would have happened if I had been more generous. But I quietly reminded her that every legal paper had been signed weeks earlier and that no one had ever bothered to ask whether I still lived there before breaking into someone else's home. The officer requested permission to place our conversation on speaker so everyone could hear my side of the story, and I agreed without hesitation because I had nothing left to hide. As my voice echoed through the living room, I calmly explained that I had permanently moved away, legally sold the property long before my business trip began, and never gave anyone permission to enter the residence, leaving my parents and brother standing in complete silence as the truth slowly erased every excuse they had carefully prepared. The silence inside the living room lasted only a few seconds before Mason desperately reached into his backpack and pulled out a stack of printed papers that he claimed proved I had agreed to let him stay in the house. One officer carefully examined every page while another compared the signatures with the official property records, and it became obvious almost immediately that the documents had been created on a home printer using copied images instead of authentic legal paperwork. Daniel remained remarkably calm despite the chaos unfolding around him, explaining that he had already noticed several valuable items moved from their original locations and that one locked cabinet in his home office had visible damage around the handle. When an officer opened one of the large moving boxes near the staircase, they discovered expensive electronics, collectible watches, important business files, and several personal belongings that belonged to Daniel, making it impossible for anyone to argue that this had simply been an innocent misunderstanding. My father realized the situation was slipping out of his control and tried convincing the officers that the entire family had entered the house because they honestly believed I still owned it. One detective quietly asked a simple question that nobody expected, wondering why they had never called, texted, or requested permission before changing the locks, unpacking dozens of boxes, and claiming bedrooms inside a property that legally belonged to another man, leaving every excuse hanging in the air without an answer. As the investigation continued, the officers reviewed security footage from neighboring homes that showed my parents arriving with a rented moving truck several hours before Mason forced his way inside the front entrance. The recordings clearly revealed them unloading furniture, carrying appliances, and celebrating in the driveway, as though they had just purchased the property themselves. destroying the final version of the story they had desperately tried to convince everyone was true. Standing thousands of miles away in my hotel room, I listened quietly as handcuffs clicked and legal warnings were read aloud, bringing an end to years of manipulation that had always been hidden behind emotional excuses and family pressure. For the first time in my life, I refused to rescue the people who had repeatedly taken advantage of my kindness, and although the moment was painful, I finally understood that real peace begins when you stop protecting those who never respected your boundaries. The weeks that followed were filled with court hearings, insurance interviews, and countless phone calls from relatives who suddenly wanted to hear my side of the story after ignoring it for years. Once every document was reviewed and every piece of evidence was presented, the judge ruled that Daniel had acted completely within the law, while Mason and the others were held responsible for the damage caused during their unlawful entry and attempted occupation of the property. My parents tried several times to contact me after the case ended, insisting that families should forgive one another and leave the past behind. But their words carried no meaning because they had never accepted responsibility for their own actions. Instead of offering sincere apologies, they continued blaming everyone except themselves, proving that they had learned nothing from the painful consequences that their favoritism had created over so many years. I focused my energy on building the peaceful life I had always wanted, purchasing a modest home in a quiet neighborhood where very few people knew anything about my past. I strengthened my friendships, devoted more attention to my career, and discovered that the absence of constant family drama created room for happiness, confidence, and opportunities that had once seemed impossible while I was trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation. Looking back now, I no longer see that experience as the worst moment of my life because it became the turning point that finally taught me the importance of healthy boundaries and self-respect. Loving your family never means surrendering your dignity, accepting endless manipulation, or sacrificing your future for people who repeatedly refuse to accept responsibility for their own choices. And that lesson became more valuable than any house or possession I ever owned. Thank you for staying with me through this unforgettable journey and for seeing how one difficult decision completely changed the direction of my life for the better. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.